Good day and welcome to our Code Blue series. January is National Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and the Prince George's County Human Trafficking Task Force is releasing 5 different video conversations around the issue of human trafficking. And these 5 different videos will be released through our various partners on the Human Trafficking Task Force. Now, our task force is comprised of many partners, both public and private. And so you're going to see just snapshots of that throughout this Code Blue series. So today we are thrilled. We are thrilled to have with us 2 of our awesome task force partners, and that is Jackie Rhone from the Department of Family Services and Tina Frundt from Courtney's house. So I was going to have them introduce themselves, although I kind of did just now, but please reintroduce yourselves and tell us just a brief sketch of what your organization is, and then I'll come back with a more in-depth question. Thank you. We'll start with Tina.
Thank you. Well, my name is Tina Frundt, and I'm the founder of Courtney's House. Courtney's House works with youth, both male and female, who are forced into sex trafficking, ages 11 to 24, but our average age in Courtney's House is 11 to 17. So we provide a drop-in center of services, and we'll be explaining more of that today.
Thank you, Tina. And Jackie, if you would tell us a little bit about your organization and who you are.
Good afternoon. I'm Jackie Rhone with the Department of Family Services, the Domestic Violence and Human Trafficking Division. And the division is about 8 years old, founded under the previous county executive, Rashawn Baker, then our state's attorney, Ms. Also Brooks. And the division was created amongst the health and human service agencies to respond to domestic violence and human trafficking, to offer a holistic approach from the health and human service agencies, working with our public safety agencies and our nonprofit providers. We have a housing resource coordinator, and we are responsible for community outreach and education on those 2 topics. Thanks for having me, Renee.
Thank you. I think that's fascinating, the 8 years, and that it is, I guess, tacitly acknowledged as a public health issue, public health crisis, which is a very important part. Excuse me while I drink water. So Tina, back to you. Please tell us, Courtney's House, it has such a phenomenal reputation and the name, but would you please tell our listeners really the history and why and what Courtney's House is, and really drill down so that we have a full understanding of what you do, how you serve our survivors, and all of those sorts of things.
Yes, thank you. So Courtney's House is an African American survivor-run organization, the only one in the area. So survivor-run means I'm a survivor of child sex trafficking. And really, I wanted to start Courtney's House, we've been around for about almost 12 years, of services that was not provided for me and that should have been provided. So many people think everybody's homeless who's trafficked and needs a housing, but I work with youth, and a lot of youth are actually in your foster care. And so the youth that we work with in Prince George's County right now aren't actually over the age of 16. So housing may have not been the issue. It may have been other issues behind it. It may have been family, or that put them in a situation, or it may have been a person that put them in a situation. Courtney's House is a long-term service provider, and that's what I needed when I was in life as well. Something that follows you, especially with youth, with your needs that you need. Not only like counseling sessions, but around other youth that have been through the same thing, so that they're not being judged. You know, we're not just a service provider, we also work on policy with youth. We have a youth policy group. So everything we do is youth focused. That means we literally do ask them what's going on as well and what changes that need to be made. We also help with educational pieces. So they actually are doing their schoolwork at Courtney's House as well while we're social distancing in this time. So there's so much more. We have a full we have a full food program at Courtney's House that serves real meals, nothing canned, so that they also get foods and can take food back with them. So I would definitely say we're a family. We have an emergency hotline that we work with the youth that calls. We work with a very young population, so we do a lot on social media as well for the youth.
Outstanding. And I think everything you said was very important, but I want to focus in on the survivor run. I think that very often we do not include the survivor's voice in what we are doing in this field. And so if there's anybody that's listening, I would urge you to always consider and to remember that it's almost like telling people what they need without asking or including in the decisions. So survivor voice, survivor perspective is critical in this work. The other thing I wanted to ask is, and you answered it partly, you said that part of the reason that Courtney's House came into being was that there were some services that you did not receive that that you really needed, that Courtney's House does now. And you mentioned that you needed long-term services. Is there anything else that Courtney's House provides to your survivors, to survivors that you were in drastic need of and didn't receive?
Yeah, so the number one thing, that's why we buy food. Think about that. We talk over food, we gather over food, we have a relationship and a family over food. So that's one. Clothing and needs is one. The other thing I mentioned was like our counseling service, having someone who actually knows about trafficking that you don't have to guess or feel sorry for to work on that plan. Answering on phone in the middle of the night, our hotline, when it's after 5 o'clock and nobody's answering and it's in the middle of the night. If you have an emergency, working with police that you trust and know that we're the ones that's going to help them, along with that, if they have an emergency situation, it's also important. Um, Having a relationship, me actually trying to work with police is a big thing because a lot of people, 86% of our youth are African American and the other percentage is Latina. So look at that population. It's very, very important that you have to teach them about a police connection, right? Because maybe that wasn't always seen in a positive light. So all of these services were things that I missed and didn't have when I needed them at the time.
I think that's so important for us to hear. Can you unpack just a little bit the clothing piece? I think that I know why that's so important, but can you explain to all of us why that piece that was lacking that you are providing is so important to a survivor? You're muted. We can't hear.
That's an excellent question, Renee. I really appreciate that because people don't think about that. What are some of those needs? And one of them is clothing. And the reason why is a few actual reasons why. Because remember, I told you some youth are in care. So some youth are in care, but they left all their items and clothing. And when you're in a situation of trafficking, although they buy you all these pretty, beautiful items, you can't take any of them with you. So you don't have the clothing that you need as well. The other rule, that again, back to the youth that are also in care and don't, they leave and move around a lot, right? Or sometimes it takes a while for them to get the services that they need. We have to provide coats and items until the vouchers and things come into place. So those are some reasons that they do need items right away. But let's talk about very quickly what I mean by items. So I do not mean like sweatpants and sweatshirt as items. I mean like real items that they wear. So boys, we don't think about boys enough, and people don't donate enough for boys. Youth wear skinny jeans, right? So when we're thinking about what they need, you have to give them items that don't look like in a juvenile facility, which are kind of sweat clothes or sweatpants. You have to let them feel like they're not less than. And here you are with some items and clothes that you would wear. And I think that's important.
Yes, it is. I think that when we're donating, very particularly for human trafficking, we have to think about the dignity that that entails, and not that we're cleaning out our closet and, oh, here's a good, It makes us feel good that we're giving away our discarded items. So I love that you said that it has to be intentional, that it has to be thinking of, would I wear this? Is this something that I would want to receive? And before we go to Jackie, can you unpack that just a little bit more about the psychological, the emotional, about how and why that is so important?
So, I really also pulled that from when I was a youth, right? And how I wanted to people receive me, giving me items for an emergency purpose that doesn't look like something I wear. Actually, on the mental, what actually happens, the way you told me the same thing, is that you feel like you're still less than. Like, I have this outfit that is less than. Nobody else has it. It reminds me, I'm going to be honest, because this is what they say, of juvenile detention. So if you forget that they wear sweatpants and sweatshirts and a color in juvenile detention, or in jail lockup until you don't have the correct clothes. So we don't want them to feel that way. They're a victim of a crime, right? We want them to have less traumatic as we possibly can. One of them is making sure that they still have the same items. So ours is more like skinny jeans that they will wear, a regular shirt that they teenagers will wear. And that way it keeps their dignity. It also, the respect. They also appreciate that, usually tell you right away thank you and how much they respect that you did that, which leads to a conversation that you all can have. So this is like a pattern to have that conversation to find out what's really going on. Thank you, Renee, for asking that.
And thank you. So Jackie, talk to us a little bit more in depth about the programs or programming that the Department of Family Services, I'll just call it DFS for the sake of brevity, provides to our youth, particularly as we talk about human trafficking, both sex and labor.
Okay, so my division within the department works specifically with the nonprofit providers to fill those gaps. And it could be gaps through our through our resiliency fund. It could be gaps around housing disparities. Um, so it really kind of depends, as Tina mentioned, each survivor comes with a different set of needs, and we use our skill sets and our partners to kind of figure out the best way to fill the needs of that particular family. It could be working with our Department of Social Services through the Family Preservation Unit, providing assistance and extended counseling outside of what Tina's organization offers. There's some other nonprofit providers that offer counseling services and groups as well. At our department, the Children in Need of Supervision Division works with the adults and the youth, hopefully before they actually get into the trafficking arena, where we see some challenges happening within the family household to help bond that family so that they don't end up, the children don't become runaways and then, of course, offer themselves into the world of being trafficked potentially. So we offer family preservation and those types of services, but as well as once a youth or an adult is in the trafficking world, we offer supportive services to bring them back and stabilize them.
So just as I just remembered, I didn't introduce myself. So that all of this makes sense. So I'm Renee Battle Brooks, and I'm the executive director of the Prince George's County Human Relations Commission. And with that, we wear many hats, 5 to be very specific, but one of the hats that we wear is chairing the Prince George's County Human Trafficking Task Force. So that's how this all kind of relates. So these are two of our amazing partners on that task force. And just to lay a little bit of foundation for anybody that's listening that may not know about human trafficking or what it is, just briefly, human trafficking in Maryland consists of both labor and sex. Labor just took effect October 1st, 2019 for labor trafficking. And so for both sex and labor trafficking, there is required force, fraud, or coercion. Now there's an exception. We're going to talk about that because that exception is exactly what applies to our conversation today. But for sex and labor trafficking, force, fraud, or coercion is required, one of those, or a combination thereof for a sex act, if it's sex trafficking in exchange for something of value, or if it's labor. Labor, and there are many forms of labor and many types. It's not as clear cut as it sounds. It's very nuanced, but some form of labor in exchange for something of value. That value exchange goes to somebody else, not to the person performing the sex act or the labor. Now, for sex trafficking, for someone who is a child, force, fraud, or coercion is not required. The only thing required is that there is a child under the age of 18, that there is a sexual act of some sort done in exchange for something of value. That's it. Doesn't matter that there's nothing else that matters. Consent is not an issue. It doesn't apply. Children cannot consent to any of this. Children cannot be, should not be defendants or criminals of this act. I know that the state of Maryland is trying to pass the safe harbor. They've passed part of it, but that absolutely says that a child cannot be charged as a defendant in any type of sexual act or sexual commercial business. Believe it or not, that still happens some places in Maryland. And so, a sidebar, call your representative, call your elected officials in Annapolis. We need to get this passed. It's a travesty. So I digress. So that's the backdrop, or sort of the foundation for our discussion. So, and I throw this out to both of you now. Let's talk about the vulnerabilities of youth. Why is there such vulnerability for traffickers for youth? Or another way, what are those vulnerabilities?
So when we think about the vulnerabilities, I think we immediately go to someone outside. But I want to go through all paradigms for a minute. 53% of my population were trafficked by their families at first. So we don't think of that as a vulnerability. So what is that within the family? 100% of all the youth are sexually abused before their trafficking situation. So that can also be a vulnerability. If it's inside the home, well, the vulnerability is the next trafficking situation. Why? Because that became normalized inside the home. So that's another one. If they don't have any issues, kind of that, 100% again are abused, sexually abused before the trafficking situation. So maybe there are some issues going on inside the home, and they leave the home, and maybe their friends can trick them into a party where they're thinking, hey, I'm hanging out with friends, or maybe other friends say, hey, come hang out with my boyfriend. And that situation became something, but something is going on at home, and we forget that people run from and run to something, and maybe it's just something going on in the home. Now, the other situation, I have youth that go to great charter schools. They got straight A's. I have youth that also are in private school, very prominent ones, and had good grades. And they were also trafficked. A few reasons. One, there was nothing wrong in the household. Did not experience any abuse from those parents, but there still was some sexual abuse when they were younger. The parents sought us out for help. So this is a family that the kids love. However, sometimes there could be a trafficker in our home and we don't know. And what that means is online. So sometimes they're talking to people online. That's our youth with the straight A's. See, we don't worry about the straight A's. We're like, oh, she's fine. She's getting good grades. But what was happening was some other issues internally were going on. And then she met older people online, but those people may have lied about their age. Maybe we thought they were youth and they were going to meet them. And it turned into a different situation than what they thought. These are the real ways that our youth get involved. And I want to include our boys because back to being abused in the home. All of our boys were either abused in the home or outside the home as well. Most of our boys do not identify as LGBTQI at all. Most of the boys are not over the age of 16, so I don't know why we try to force them into it because they were abused. All of them are African American, And I want to talk about that very quickly to learn the other issue of because they were abused and thinking maybe they're having identity crisis within themselves of what happened to them. So most of our boys were in situations like this. They were literally did leave maybe a placement or home. They were walking, didn't have anywhere to go, right? You're mad, you want to leave, but you don't have anywhere to go. And the man approached them in a car. It was like, hey, you want to ride? And maybe told them they can do something, but they needed the money. So that was another way of having that abuse and boys entering a life that they didn't actually know at all. And then the last way I would say is that we don't think of U.S. citizens on labor trafficking. We don't think about that. Although there are many cases that I'm sure Renee could talk about, especially magazine crews in New York and time that people did. But here, have you ever noticed really young boys mostly that maybe are at the gas stations or maybe at Aldi's or other grocery stores and they're asking to help you? And they're standing out there. We're like, okay, but we're not paying attention. We're helping them, but we're not thinking they're not in school. They're not doing online classes. They're 9, 10. Look at their clothes. We don't do that. So actually, what we found out was some of our boys, a lot of them actually, most that were involved in that were actually another male. So the behind the scenes was a man who had them out there also doing other sexual favors. These are low income boys targeting people in the foster care system or parents who have been in and out of the foster care system. So those are some ways that go on right around us and those vulnerabilities that we see but don't know as well.
Oh, go ahead, Jackie.
I was just going to ask Tina to because we had this opportunity to educate our community on human trafficking, to talk more about how self-esteem plays into this, because I want to make sure that our community doesn't always think of um, the movie Taken. You know, while that does happen, that's not necessarily the trafficking that's really occurring in our community. And so I know you talked about that straight A student, but talk about how self-esteem, um, peer pressure within the household or amongst their friends play into their vulnerability to be trafficked and go home every day, because
Yeah.
trafficking isn't always that snatched youth that we never see again. Sometimes there are youth that goes home every single day to their household, to that perfect family, but we don't know that they're being trafficked. So let's use this as an opportunity to talk a little bit more about how that self-esteem, the peer pressures, and the taught behaviors amongst their peers may lead them to be really easily groomed into the world of trafficking. So if you can
Yeah,
talk
well,
about that a
thank
little
you
bit
for
more,
that.
Tina, I'm sure you.
Thank you, Jackie, for talking a little bit about that, and I will expand. I appreciate that. Well, let's expand back to our youth with straight A's because her issue also was self-esteem. Of course, from other issues, if I told you early on sexual assault, right, that happened years ago, and we're like, oh, they're over it now. They received some counseling, but there were some self-esteem issues because puberty hit. So all youth have self-esteem issues, and it's usually about the way and their appearance. And the boys, it's always about fitting in. And if anyone can see that they were abused. And I want you to think about that for a moment because youth who are sexually abused do think everybody can see it, right? And in a way you can and can play on that. So thank you for bringing that up. There's some other things as well as Jackie said. Well, when you're talking about familiar control, with again, that's a big percentage of our youth. A lot is internal, which means that it is a generation of abuse. So the mother was in it, all the sisters, all the brothers. And I want you to think about that because think about the one child who's 14 and the whole entire family's in, and you're like, I don't want to do this. What if the whole family doesn't talk to you? So that's also an issue, and it beats on all of their self esteem. Think about that. The other things, especially with the boys, it's about defining and not defining, and people thinking something that plays into that vulnerability, and all of them have that insecurity that you can't see because all of our kids are like, I'm the baddest person in the world, but the reality is all of them are trying to fit in. right? And so all of them want the money and the cars and all the songs that they say it's okay to do, but they're very scared when they get in it and it's not what they thought. I'm gonna say that because they're children. And they're like, oh, I want to do that. I see things online. They do. They answer ads that they see online, thinking that someone tells them how pretty they are when on Instagram. And this happens all the time because you have that insecurity. So even the straight A student that we keep going, oh, she's great, have all these insecurities and the life we don't know about that we don't know. So I want you to remember this and remember this in my situation. When I was adopted, my parents were great. It wasn't my parents who adopted me. The issue is all the other insecurities, and they didn't know about a grown man I was seeing. So I want you to think about that. Because none of the parents that are good parents knew about the other person, that person was telling them to hide because they see we got someone. We only see the youth behavior. We're not seeing the person hidden behind that. So thank you, Jackie, for that and reminding everybody to really understand trauma. We see a youth's behavior, but we don't see the hidden person behind the scenes that's pulling all the strings.
It's such a good point, and I want to amplify several things that you've said because I think it's worth people really hearing. One, the subtext is that victim survivors do not look any particular way. They look like all of us, just as Tina and Jackie have said. The straight A student, the person that comes from a quote unquote good family, right? The person that comes from higher socioeconomic, the person that comes from a struggling family, the person that is troubled, the person that is the most popular. All of these dynamics are there, and our victim survivors can be any one of those persons. That's the first thing I want to reiterate from what Tina and Jackie have said. The second thing is traffickers do not look like a particular way. If traffickers look like traffickers, wouldn't we all be forewarned and couldn't we stamp this out, right? If traffickers and the sex trafficking look like the stereotype with the hat and the cane and the grill, and right, or the creepy guy with the raincoat lurking in the corner, traffickers and predators, because that's what traffickers are, whether it's labor or sex, are predators. And predators, I have learned just from through the lens that I have worked this arena, are that predators are one of the smartest people that you will ever meet. They are personable when they want to be, and they are gifted with knowing how to figure out what makes you tick, to figure out what you're missing and supplying. And so I have worked with survivors who are some of the most brilliant and smart people that I know, because we like to think that is, only if you're dumb, you fall for that, or it is not. It is, predators can get anybody. They can get you, they can get me. So that's the other thing I want to amplify. The other thing is what Tina touched on a little bit, and it bears repeating. We are in this space where there is more online use of adults and children. And so we have to wrap up quickly here, but I want parents and guardians to be ever mindful of that vulnerability. Traffickers and predators have not gone away. They're just adapting and adopting new ways of figuring out. Trafficking is motivated by greed, and greed is something that we cannot forget about. So we do have to wrap up. I want to thank Jackie. I want to thank Tina for being here to impart this wisdom and these experience through each of your lenses. It was invaluable. If you have questions and you're listening, the easiest way is to contact us and we will shoot those questions out or connect people. Our email is on the screen there, hrcstaff@co.pg.md.us, and we will push it out quickly, 30 seconds. Tina, if you want to give contact, and Jackie, if you want to give contact info.
Well, thank you. This has been great, you all. Thank you, everyone here. And then our resources. Please, if you want to follow up on resources about Courtney's House, you go to www.courtneyshouse.org. www.courtneyshouse.org. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Okay. And the Department of Family Services can be reached through calling 311 or just going onto the local county government website and just go to Prince George's County Department of Family Services. Again, we are all partners of the Human Trafficking Task Force and can be reached through that email address as well that was on the screen. If you know someone or think you know someone that may be experiencing human trafficking, please reach out to us to seek assistance for that family member or that individual.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you. This has been wonderful. And if you see something, say something. Call 911. Thank you.